Hello students, today we will be continuing with our chapter surface finish from the subject engineering metrology. In the previous lectures we have studied what is surface texture, what is primary texture, what is secondary texture, what are the various factors causing surface finish. We have studied the symbols for surface finish. We have studied the grades of the surface finish and their values. Today we will be learning the various methods of measuring the surface finish. So let's begin with the lecture. Surface finish measurement. For measuring the surface finish, two methods are used. That is, the first is inspection by comparison method, and it is also called as qualitative methods. Second, direct instrument measurement, and it is called as quantitative method. So in qualitative method, the surface finish of a specimen is determined by comparing it with some other specimen of known surface roughness. Whereas in case of quantitative method or direct instrument method, the surface roughness of the surface is determined by using some instrument. Now we will see the qualitative methods. Qualitative methods. In this method, the surface texture is determined by comparing the surface under consideration with a specimen whose roughness value is known. So in qualitative method, in order to determine the roughness of the roughness value of the surface, we compare the surface whose roughness has to be determined with a specimen whose roughness value is already known. So by comparison, we can determine the roughness of the surface which is under study or under consideration. Both the surface under test and the specimen should be finished by similar machining process. One important point in qualitative method is that while comparing the two surfaces, it is very important that both the surfaces which are being compared, that is the specimen as well as the specimen under consideration, should be finished by same machining process. Otherwise, we cannot compare the two surfaces. So for comparison, we have to select two surfaces such that both the surfaces are finished by using similar machining process. Now, the various qualitative methods are as follows. Visual inspection. Now, visual inspection, it is very simple that the surface roughness is identified by just observing the surface of the specimen under consideration. Anybody can guess the surface texture or the roughness by eye judgment. So here eye judgment is used to identify the roughness. Sometimes lenses with illumination can also be used. In order to get the magnified view, we can use lenses. So basically in visual inspection, inspection is done simply by observing the surface which is under consideration. Second is the touch inspection. In touch inspection, the hand is moved over the surface and then we identify the roughness of the surface. Even though the roughness height of two surfaces is same, but if frequency of the irregularities in one surface is more, then the surface is said to be rougher than the surface with less frequencies. Now in this statement it is mentioned that two surfaces can have the same roughness height, but one surface can be smoother than the other surface, or the other surface can be more rougher than the first surface. This depends on the frequency of irregularities, means how frequently the irregularities occur on the surface. If the irregularities occur more frequently, then even though both the roughness heights of both the specimen is same, the second surface will be more rougher than the first surface, since the frequency of irregularities in the second surface is more than the first surface. So in case of touch inspection, the inspector just moves the hand over the surface in order to determine the frequency of the irregularities. Third is the surface photographs. In this method, photographs of surface are taken using some illumination method. So by using some illumination method, we take the photograph of the surface whose roughness has to be determined. Surface irregularities or scratches appear as dark spots and flat portion of surface appear as bright areas. So when photographs are taken, we can easily see in the photographs that the surface where there are scratches or irregularities, they can be seen as dark spots, whereas the flat portion or where irregularities are not present, they can be seen as brighter areas. Next, microscopic inspection. In this case, various sets of master surfaces of known surface values are available. So for microscopic inspection, we collect various sets of master surfaces whose roughness value is already known. So we will compare these master surfaces with the specimen under consideration, that is a specimen for which we have to determine the surface roughness. A master surface is observed through one eyepiece of the microscope and the surface under test is observed through another eyepiece. So by using the two eyepiece of the microscope, we observe in one eyepiece the master surface, whereas in the second eyepiece we observe the specimen which is under consideration. Now pattern of the surface to be tested is adjusted to match with any one pattern of the master surface. So while observing the two uh, specimens under the microscope, that is the standard specimen and the specimen under consideration, we keep on matching the surfaces of both the specimens until both the surfaces of the specimen match with each other. And when the surfaces of both the specimens match with each other, then we can know that the roughness value of the specimen, because the roughness value of the specimen will be equal to the roughness value of the standard specimen whose surface matches with the surface under consideration. Now pattern of the surface to be tested is adjusted. So we will adjust the pattern so that it matches with one pattern of the master surface, thus enabling us to know the roughness value of the given specimen. So basically in a microscopic inspection, we compare the surface of the specimen which is under consideration with the various master surfaces, and when one of the master surfaces matches with the given surface under consideration, then we can easily determine the value of the specimen surface roughness. Use of photocells. Now photocells are also used to determine the roughness value or the roughness of the surface. Here light of known intensity is projected on the surface to be tested. So the specimen which is under consideration will be taken, and then some light of known intensity will be projected on the surface. Some part of the light is absorbed and other is reflected. So when the light will be projected on the surface, some of part of the light will be absorbed, whereas some other will be reflected. More the surface is finished, more the light will be reflected. So the reflected intensity is measured by the photocell. Change in the intensity is a measure of surface roughness. So whatever the change in the intensity will be, it will indicate the measure of the surface roughness. Now what are the limitation of qualitative methods? The results of these methods are not reliable because they can be misleading if comparison of surface under test is not done properly with the standard specimen produced by similar machining process. So a limitation of this method is that uh, while comparing there can be some error, because if comparison is not done properly then we will get the wrong result. So the results can be misleading if the comparison is not done properly, and this is the drawback or the limitation of the qualitative methods. Next, we will study quantitative methods. Now, in quantitative methods, the numerical value of the surface finish of any surface is measured using instruments or some instrument measuring instrument like Dr. Tomlinson surface meter, profilometer, etc. In qualitative methods, we never determine the roughness value directly by using some instrument. We compare it with some standard specimen whose roughness value is already known, and then we determine, or we can say that in qualitative methods, the roughness is determined indirectly, whereas in quantitative methods, some instruments like Dr. Tomlinson surface meter, profilometer, etc., are directly used to determine the numerical value of the surface roughness of the surface under consideration. Now let us see Dr. Tomlinson surface meter. Now this is the whole setup of Dr. Tomlinson surface meter used to determine the surface roughness. First, we will see the construction of the different parts. So the first part here is the stylus. Now stylus is a vertical shaft or rod like part having a diamond probe at the bottom. The second part is the spring, a coil spring on the upper side and a leaf spring on the bottom side. Now this spring, that is the coil spring and the leaf spring, are used to hold the stylus in the vertical position. Now what happens? This is the surface whose roughness has to be determined. Now this stylus is moved over this surface. So When moving over this surface, there is probability that the stylus may move towards left, so due to the motions, but we have to avoid this motion. The stylus motion has to be restricted only in the vertical direction. See, it is here vertical motion of the stylus. So in order to restrict the motion of the stylus in the vertical direction only, these springs are used. It is the coil spring on the upper side and the leaf spring on the lower side. Second is the lap cylinder. This is the second part, lap cylinder. Now the lap cylinder is not a fixed cylinder, it is free to rotate. Now third is the fixed rollers. Now you can see here the top view. In the front view a single fixed roller is visible, but from the top view we have two fixed rollers. So this is my lap cylinder. This is the front view of the lap cylinder and this is the top view of the lap cylinder. Lap cylinder is free to rotate and these are the fixed rollers which are fixed, and this is the top view of the stylus. So the lap cylinder is placed in between the stylus and the fixed rollers. The next is the arm. Now the arm is connected to the lap cylinder. From the top you can see this is my lap cylinder, and to this lap cylinder this arm is connected, and the arm is having a diamond scriber at its end. This is the this pointed part is nothing but the diamond scriber, and the last part that is here is nothing but the smoke glass. On the smoke glass the roughness pattern of the surface will be produced by using the diamond scriber of the arm. Now we will see how the working takes place. Now in order to determine the roughness of this surface, this whole setup is moved in horizontal direction, that is horizontal movement of the body. So when this whole setup is moved in horizontal direction, this diamond probe of the stylus starts moving over this surface. Now as you can see, this surface is having irregularities in the form of hills and valleys. So the stylus will move up and down due to these irregularities, or we can say that there will be vertical motion of the stylus. Now due to this vertical motion, that is up and down motion of the stylus, the lap cylinder which is free to rotate will start moving in particular direction due to the motion of the vertical stylus. Now due to this motion of the lap cylinder, the arm which is connected to the lap cylinder will also get some motion as according to the motion of the lap cylinder. You can see the arm is having some motion. Now when the arm starts moving due to the motion of the lap cylinder, the diamond scriber at the end of the arm will produce the pattern of the surface on the smoked glass, and finally we will get the traces of the surface for which the surface roughness has to be determined. Now the height or the roughness height of the surface is much lower, but we will get a magnified view on the smoke glass. That is, this pattern is nothing but the magnified view. This is because of the arm. So in order to produce the magnified view of the roughness or the irregularities, we are using the arm. And finally this pattern which is obtained on the smoke glass is again magnified using some optical instrument. That is, the height will be increased, that is, we will magnify these traces, and after magnification the traces are studied and the roughness value is then determined accordingly. Next we will see profilometer. Again, profilometer is an instrument which is used to determine the roughness in microns. Now profilometer consists of two units, a tracer and an amplifier. Now we can see this is the entire setup. Now this is the surface of which the roughness has to be determined. Now we will see the first the construction. Now this lower part is nothing but the tracer or the stylus. That is the first part. Profilometer consists of two parts, the tracer and the amplifier. So the first part, tracer, is here, that is stylus, which will move in vertical direction over the surface. Now again here it is a coil spring which will be used to hold the tracer or to enable the motion of the tracer only in vertical direction. Now the third part is the induction coil, in which a voltage or EMF will be induced due to the motion of the tracer. And the fourth is the permanent magnets. Now these are permanent magnets which are used to produce a magnetic field. Now how the working of this instrument occurs. Now the entire setup or the pickup unit is moved over the surface. Now when this stylus moves over the surface, due to the irregularities, that is the hills and the valleys, this tracer or the stylus having the diamond probe will move in vertical direction, that is up and down. And since this induction coil is connected with the stylus, it will also have a vertical motion. Now due to the vertical motion of the induction coil, a EMF will be generated, since here we have a magnetic field produced by the permanent magnets. So due to the magnetic field and the motion of the induction coil, a EMF or a voltage will be introduced in the coil. Now this voltage is then fed to an amplifier, since the magnitude or the value of the EMF generated will be very less due to the small height of the surface roughness or the surface height width. So the small or the low magnitude EMF will be amplified using an amplifier, and finally the amplified voltage will be fed to an electronic recorder, which will generate the pattern of the roughness of the surface, and finally using that pattern we can determine the roughness value of the surface which is under consideration. Now we will see some numericals based on roughness, or how to determine the roughness using various methods. Now the problem is, in the measurement of surface roughness, heights of 20 successive peaks and valleys measured from a datum are as follows. So here 20 successive peaks and valleys whose value or the height is measured from a datum are given, that is 45, 25, 35, 40, so on, and the last value is given as 38 microns. So all the values are in microns. If these measurements were made over a length of 20 meter, now this 20 meter is nothing but the sampling length. As explained in the previous lecture, whenever we determine the surface roughness, we consider only a particular portion of the workpiece for determining the roughness, and that length is nothing but the sampling length. So here the sampling length is given as 20 millimeter. Now we have to determine the roughness value using CLA method and the RMS. So CLA value and the RMS value of the roughness has to be determined. So we will see the solution. Now length is equal to 20 mm, that is the sampling length, and the total number of readings taken over the sampling length is equal to 20, since it is given heights of the 20 successive peaks and valleys. So total number of divisions over which the readings have been taken of the peaks and the valleys is equal to 20. So n is equal to 20. Now center line average method or CLA value is obtained by adding all the heights of the peaks and the valleys. It is successive peaks and valleys. We will add all the height which is measured from the given datum, and then we will find the mean value. So as you can see here, CLA value is equal to, first we will add all the values of the peaks and the valleys. So here is the addition, and then after addition we will divide it by the total number of divisions, which is given as 20. So the total addition value divided by the 20, then we will get the mean value, and this mean value will give the value of the CLA or the center line average value equal to 29.35 microns. Students, here note that all the values should be positive. Here successive peaks and valleys are given, but the values should be taken as positive only. For the valleys, we should not take negative values. All the values should be positive, and after addition of all the values, we will divide it with the total number of divisions, and then we can get the CLA value. Now the second is RMS value, root mean square value. In order to determine the RMS value, first we will square all the values of the peaks and the valleys. So you can see here, first we have squared all the values. After squaring, we will add all the values, and then we will find the mean by dividing it with the total number of divisions, that is 20. So for determining RMS value, first square all the values given in the question, then add all the values, and after addition of the values divide it by the total number of divisions, that is, in this case it is given as 20. After addition, whatever value we get, we will divide it by 20, and finally the answer obtained will be put under the square root, since it is what, root mean square. So first square it, then find the mean value by dividing it with the total number of divisions, and finally put the entire value under the square root, and finally the answer that we get is equal to 30.51 microns. So the center line average value for this question is equal to 29.35 microns, whereas the RMS value is equal to 30.51 microns. This is the roughness value obtained by using CLA method and the RMS method. Thank you.